There's a huge amount of concern at present about the post-truth world. The idea that how can we know the truth when there's so much information, and of that information so much of it is misinformation. In other words, people have got their facts wrong, they haven't checked them properly, or they're just passing on something which someone else said. And there's disinformation, which means information that's deliberately been loaded to deceive us, to manipulate us, to make us believe certain things, or to vote for a certain way. And then there's algorithms which might have been aimed to detect what is the best verified facts, what is the truest facts, but actually they've been programmed to look for what are the most sensational facts, or the ones that will cause the biggest reaction in order to make the most money. So in this sort of sea of chaos, people are saying, we can't know the truth anymore. Truth is gone, it's finished. Now, I actually think there's huge promise in this situation. I think it's the best thing that's happened for a long time, because I think it could lead to far better understanding of truth and a far better understanding of truth. Because there are certain misconceptions that people have, which I think have really degraded truth. There's two of them. One is the fact that people think of truth as just a binary thing. Something is either true or it is false. And so, it's actually, truth is a very complicated, multi-dimensional thing. I've given this example in the past. I say, imagine a school where they decide the school play this year is going to be Hamlet. And then a history master says, no, we can't do Hamlet because it's historically inaccurate. Shakespeare was a fantasist. There's no evidence at all there was someone called Hamlet in Denmark, and so on and so forth. We just shouldn't be showing this nonsense while we're educating our children. Now, the irony of that for me is that why did the drama department decide to choose Hamlet? Simply because it's got so much truth in it. Shakespeare's plays have enormous psychological truth. They have sociological truth about interaction between people. They have political truth. They're full of truth. But it's also true that historical facts are not well documented in Shakespeare's plays. So this idea that something is either true or not true is degrading truth from a rich and complex multi-dimensional thing to a simple on-off switch, which button do you press, true or false. So that's one thing which we need to grow out of. The other thing is that for most of my life in the past century, truth has been a commodity. It's something you either are given or you go and buy it. If you want to know the truth about the world, you typically would buy a newspaper, and or you would switch on television, and you've paid for your BBC license, and that's how you pay for it. Or else it's a commercial or a free newspaper, in which case your payment is because you're looking at advertisements. So basically, it's like going to the high street and saying, I'm going to buy food. So, how do you buy food in the high street? Well, there are the big suppliers, Waitrose and Sainsbury's and that, and you can go there, and they have the advantage of a big network of producers, and so there's a big choice that. But also you might go to a small specialist butcher which has exceptional quality meat, or the health food store for certain things which you won't necessarily find in the supermarket. So similarly, you choose your newspapers, you choose the radio, you used to choose the newspapers, choose the radio stations you trusted to tune into, and what television services. That was how you went shopping for this commodity. Now, what's happened now? Why doesn't that work in the same way? It's because there are now so many alternatives. And it's not just you've got all the old services and newspapers, plus a whole lot more, in which case you might just say, well, I'm going to stick to the old ones. The thing is that because there's so much rivalry, it's actually lowering the standards of the traditional shops. They can no longer afford to have so many reporters around the world. They have to get their sources from other places, like from Twitter. And so the quality of those reliable, trustable, authoritative sources of news and information is declining a bit. At the same time, there's a torrent of other alternatives. Now, in this analogy of, looking for truth is like trying to find good food. It's as though our high street, the old high street we know and love, has been replaced by a sort of third world shanty town sort of flea market, Imagine going to a place like that. You go in and you don't speak the language, and there are all these weird smells and exotic things all going on all the time, and you think, well, I'm hungry, I need to buy something, and you think, are there any hygiene regulations in this place? Is the stuff that people are buying, might it make me sick or give me diarrhea and things like that? It's a nightmare. And then you look around at some of the shifty characters and you think, people might actually give me poison so that they can then steal my wallet and my telephone. So what can you do? How can you possibly get nourishment in a situation like that? Is it impossible, as people are saying? Is there no way of getting the truth? And I say there is. There's a perfectly good way, although it's not easy, of finding the truth, because you do what people have been doing for thousands of years before the high street was created. You go foraging. You go looking for stuff which, first of all, does it look good? Taste it? Does it taste good? Does it seem to have a bad effect on you? Is it actually a healthy source of nourishment? You have to find out these things. You have to learn the foraging. And that, I think, is what makes people rather happy about our present information chaos. Because I think the next generation is going to have to learn to forage for truth. Now, foraging for food, you're dealing with definite edible stuff. How? And as I say, what does it look like? What does it smell like? What does it taste like? I remember one of the things they said, if you're sort of a survivalist and you're stuck in the middle of nowhere, something you can do is take a leaf that you're suspicious about and chew it and hold it in your mouth without swallowing it. And that can actually show the beginnings of a reaction which will tell you whether it's going to be good or bad for you. It's not a certain thing, but it's just something you can do. So what are the tricks we can use? What are the techniques we can use to tell whether truth is wholesome or not? Well, I've referred from time to time to this book, A History and a Guide to the Perplexed of Truth by Felipe Fernandez Armesto. And what he says is that through the evolution of humanity over thousands of years, 4 tests for truth have been used. And he calls them feeling, authority, reason, and sensory physical testing. And he explains it a bit like this. He says, I argue that at the earliest times we know about, it was usual for truth to be understood as registered emotionally or by non-sensory and non-rational kinds of perception. So not sort of observing or reasoning, but it feels right. Then he says that as society becomes more complicated and sort of social things evolve, there comes the idea that truth is a sort of other world out there, and you need some expert to mediate it for you and tell you what is true. And that might be, the village wise man, or the chief, or later a priest, or the Pope. And then the ultimate authority was actually the Word of God himself, whether it's the Bible or the Quran. For a while that was the ultimate truth test. But while that was happening, there was also the religious foundations were building academies which became universities, and there was a great deal of debate about fine points of theology. And so the idea built up that the real test of truth was, does it stand to reason? If something's unreasonable, it can't be true. You have to argue it out and see what works. Then that's your way to find the truth. And then he suggests that nowadays we've moved into the scientific era, where the real test of truth is, can you demonstrate it under controlled conditions? You have a theory, you run a controlled experiment, and if you don't get the results the theory suggests, then you know it can't be true. If you do get the results, it doesn't absolutely guarantee it's true, but means it's much more likely to be true. So that's the ultimate test, he's saying. Now, I really like that idea of the four ways of truth, because it fits in very well with my SSOTBME idea of four cultures: magical, artistic, religious, and scientific. But there is a fundamental difference where I disagree with him. He describes this, he says the earliest sort of truth determinant would be feeling. And I don't think it is. To me, the final one, sensory measurement, is surely the very first test of truth. You see a baby doing this. The first thing a baby, before he can speak, before he can think, he'll pick up his spoon and feel it as a solid object. And he'll go bang, 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 bang on the table. He's learning repeatable experiments to prove it's solid. He puts it away and forgets about it, plays with something else, and comes back the next day or later, sees the spoon again and picks it up. It's the same spoon. He's learning about solid objects which stay solid. Bangs it again, it still works. Gosh, wow. So I think that a picture sort of early proto-human getting two pieces of flint and bashing them and finding it makes a spark. He's finding the truth that if you hit two bits of flint together in the right way, it'll make a spark. Just as, not even in the human level, a kitten patting a ping pong ball around the floor, rushes around with it. He's learning about the way a ping pong ball behaves by watching it, observing it, using it. And he goes away and forgets about it. He comes back, and next time he sees the ping pong ball, he's off again. Surely the most primitive, original way of learning is by sensory exploration. So the main difference with the way I see this evolution of truth is that he's suggesting that it's a sort of progress, a line, where the most primitive form is feeling, and the most sophisticated is testing. Whereas I see it more as a sort of a cycle, that all four of these should be active at the same time. We need all four of these ways of judging truth. You see, because the idea, the sort of feeling idea that when you strike two flints together, you're actually doing a ritual to invoke the god of fire, compared with just finding out that you get a spark, it's a very sophisticated idea. So feelings can actually be rather sophisticated. You need a human brain to be able to think of things like that, the idea of a god of fire being invoked. So I don't accept that this is the most basic and primitive way of doing it. But I do agree that these are the four things we can use when we go foraging for truth. Feeling, authority, reason, and testing. Now, how are we going to learn to do this? It's a difficult process because you have to balance all those ones. So I'm just going to take a scenario and sort of see what one could do in that scenario. And that was the time of Brexit. The idea that was presented in Brexit is that Britain could throw off the yoke of the European Parliament, European Union, which was unelected people bossing us around, and we could become what we were, a great nation and an independent one, and we could face the world as we did in the past. Now, one thing I'd say about that is for a lot of people that passed the feeling test. Now, a lot of people also didn't feel right about that, so I'm going to explain why was there such a good feeling about Brexit. Well, people of my generation remember what Britain was like before we joined the Union. After the Second World War, Britain was a bit of a bombed-out wreck. We were very poor. We were still on food rationing. Centres of our cities were sort of bombed holes, and we were poor. But we elected a socialist government, and whatever you may think of socialism now, it was a very good socialist government, and it worked in many ways. A National Health Service was founded, which really worked. There were stories in the 50s of wealthy American women coming to Britain to have their babies because what was available in our free hospitals was so much better than what was available in America at high price. We were proud of it, and it was working. Now, I was brought up in the deep country with parents who could no longer afford to send a third child to school, and the government paid a grant for me to go to a public school where I had an education that took me to having a scholarship to Cambridge University, and then all my fees were paid for me by the government. What a wonderful opportunity to present to a country boy. Now, I'm not saying, of course, that everyone in Britain in the 50s had a wonderful time. There were places in the cities, like some of the Caribbean immigrants, that were treated badly by the police. But I'm talking about the sort of feeling in Britain as a whole. The feeling was one of optimism, that we're maybe poor, but we're good, and it led to in the 60s, whereas all the decent pop music had come from America with rock and roll and all that. In the 60s there was the Beatles, there was the Mersey sound, and it became swinging London. And Britain was a place where people wanted to come to. They wanted to come and learn English. And so, for instance, there was masses of foreign students from around the world helping out in pubs and waiters and things like that, getting low-paid jobs so they could come and be in Britain. What a place to be. So that was the feel-good factor that many people felt about Brexit. But there's a warning I'm going to give there, because feel-good, if I may go back to the food analogy, I'm told a lot of the fast food people put a lot of sugar in their products so that people become addicted to it. There's a sugar rush, and they're actually eating what is not very good for them. And beware if your first judgment of something is that it feels good, because you may just be a sugar rush. Now, I'm not saying therefore don't trust feelings, it's just they must be used in conjunction with other things. So, for example, testing. Well, that's what Britain did. We voted for Brexit, and we tested it. Now, I went back to England from South Africa for a holiday after Brexit, and I could see that it was a disaster. It wasn't, the feeling wasn't that wonderful. Here's a welcoming place that people can come from all around the world and enjoy and be creative here and that sort of thing. There was a lot of distrust. The country was divided between Remainers and Brexiteers, and there was anger between them. And I'd go down the high street and I'd see a lot of my old favourite shops had shut. Many were boarded up, and some became service centres like tattoo parlours and things like that. But the atmosphere was sad. It wasn't joyful. And then British institutions like the pubs, every pub we went into had a sign saying staff desperately needed, and they were getting their children, publicans were getting their children to help out, because there wasn't all these eager students from other countries coming along to keep us going. It was sad, it was a disaster. So that is testing combined with feeling, because it wasn't just I could see physical results that weren't working, I could actually see that it felt bad. That original promise wasn't there. Okay, of course, we're not just going to use those two criteria, test and feel. What about authority? Now, this is the problem with that sort of commoditization idea. If your authority was the Daily Express, you would have been told how wonderful Brexit's going to be, not just with facts and figures, but also arguments about it. If your authority was the Guardian, you would get the opposite. You'd be told how disastrous Brexit is going to be and all the arguments against it. Notice that the authority in this case is both providing authority, but also reasoning for you. Now that's something you have to be careful of, just as you have to be careful of feelings. If your authority, which gives you the facts, is also giving you the reasoning, it could mean you're getting lazy and you're not thinking for yourself. So there is a problem with choosing authorities, just as choosing which shop you're going to get your food in. But the fact that there was competition helped to offset that. You see, one of the facts that was sort of thrown around was that if we leave the common market, there will be X million pounds which we won't have to pay. Now, the way it was presented in, as it were, the Daily Express version was, if we leave the common market, there will be X billion extra pounds for the new National Health Service. Wonderful. All that extra money for the health service, which needs it. But did the Guardian say you wouldn't get that money if you said no? Because you see, facts which are verifiable, on the whole you get them from all the reliable sources, because they've got people around the world, they've got researchers, things like that. And if one newspaper put a blatantly false fact, because of competition, all the others would tear it to shreds. So you can trust that number. This amount of money won't be saved, will be saved if we don't pay it into the common market. But the argument then is, then we can use it for the National Health Service. But the thing is, use your own brain. A Tory government, if it had an extra £1 billion, would not put it into the health service because they hate the health service. They would put some personal project or make a statue of themselves, or just up the fees, up the salaries of people in Parliament. So you can go shopping in the high street and choose your authorities, as long as you choose ones which are still large and have got a lot of researchers, things like that. As I say, that is beginning to fade away. But so you can go to the BBC, you can go to buy a newspaper and so on and so forth. But you have to remember that each one has his own bias. So you've got work to do here. You have to use your own head, as well as looking at their arguments and their figures. And so it is a complicated process. It's like foraging. You've got to learn not just to be fooled by what looks good, but what tastes good, what feels to be good to you. And you have to learn a lot. But that would be the way to survive. So I like to think that however troubled our generations are by this absolute chaos, this market of rubbish that's around us, and how the once dependable retailers, the newspapers, the television services, are beginning to lower their standards in order to try to compete in this shambles of misinformation and disinformation and crazy algorithms. That people, actual real people, will realise that if they're going to survive, they're going to have to learn how to tell the truth, how to detect the truth. And they won't just use one method which turned to be unreliable. They actually have to use all four. They have to be aware of what feels right, test things and see if they still feel right when you've tested them. They have to make judgments about which authorities they can best trust, and they have to use their brains and intellect to realise that they may get the facts may be testable or verifiable, but the arguments used could be distorted, and so avoid that on-off switch thing which says, oh, I read a false fact in that newspaper, so I'm never going to get it again, because it can't be relied on. Nothing can be relied on. It's a question of remembering that sometimes that newspaper gets its facts wrong, and adjusting your thinking for that. So never to be gullible, always be building up a resource of truth, and then finding other things that fit in with that accepted truth, bearing in mind that it's constantly evolving. That is the way I hope future generations will deal with truth. Not think of it as a simple on-off, oh no, I found the truth, I can forget, I can stop thinking now. But realising this is a very complex and interesting thing. Just as when you go foraging, you're not going to say, oh, I've discovered tomatoes are good for me, so I'm going to eat tomatoes for the rest of my life, nothing but tomatoes. But realising that the real value of foraging is to find a balanced diet, one that really supports you, nourishes you, and is the way forward.